Now, it's really important that you have an idea what your fish are meant to look like. Now, what I don't want to see is any sort of vertebrae. So this fella here is a very, very old fish, and he's obviously got some issues going on, just probably due to his age. And that can be very misleading and make you think, oh, that one's fat, so therefore I'm feeding too much. But it's really important when you're feeding to pay attention to the average fish. So what we don't want to see is invertebrates. What we do want to see is a belly, but just a little belly. So, I mean, this guy here, he's fairly good, but a little bit more of a belly. We want a belly, but we don't want a big belly. So I'd like to see these fish fed a little bit more. Now, as far as how much to feed, what we normally recommend is you start with a guide. So let's say a guide of 5 times a week, what they eat in 30 seconds. Now, that is irrelevant compared to what you're actually seeing, because it's a matter of starting somewhere, and then it's a matter of knowing what your fish should look like and then altering your behavior according to what the fish look like. So if your fish don't have little bellies, then whatever you're doing, you need to feed more. So whether that means more at once or whether that means more often, it doesn't matter. You just do whatever's going to make sense to you. And then on the other hand, if the fish start getting fat bellies, then you need to feed less. Regardless of how much you feed, you need to feed less. And then the other thing to be aware of is the amount of fish you've got. Now, for a tank this size, I'm going to say this is a very good amount of fish. I wouldn't go putting in more fish, because more fish equals more waste. And also, you've got to allow them to grow, because some of these fish, like this fox face and these tanks, they're going to get a decent size. So getting more fish is not something I'd recommend. Probably the only thing I would recommend is if you don't have a blenny, I'd probably think about wiggling a blenny in there, but that's about it. Other than that, it's actually a really, really beautiful fish tank. It's got coralline algae growth. The anemones are probably going a bit too well. I've tested the phosphate and nitrate, and it's basically 0, which makes sense considering that the fish are a little bit underfed. So these fish were previously being overfed, and that's something you very commonly hear, is that people go from one extreme to the other. So once again, you need to understand what your fish should look like, and then you need to alter what you're doing according to what you're seeing. And you got to understand it takes about a month to make any difference. So if you change your behavior and you start feeding a little bit more, then you got to wait a month to see if it makes any difference. Now, this behavior is pretty common for blue tang too.
Oh, she does that.
Yeah, they'll go and lay in all sorts of weird and wonderful positions, and that's very much just what they do.
Sometimes I think she's scared.
Yeah, well, that happens. So it's a very beautiful tank.
Alright, so feed more.
Feed more. And then it's also important that any of your carbon-based products like this, which there's none in, so that's okay. When there's no ammonia or no nitrate or phosphate, you don't want to feed any of those products. So I'm not going to replace that today, because we don't want to dose it until there actually is phosphate and nitrate. Don't try to fix phosphate and nitrate if you don't have phosphate and nitrate, otherwise there can be adverse reactions.